to learn new information, to figure things out, to explore the world and understand it, and also your preference for how you make decisions. What's your evaluative criteria when you're making decisions? And so there's a lot of wiggle room in all of that, right? So when I tell you what's called your best fit type, or at least what I'm seeing, you get to choose your best fit type actually. But I'm gonna make a suggestion. And you're like, I know nothing about this, so I'm assuming, right?
Well,
a little bit?
I know the Myers-Briggs breakdown numbers, but I'm very curious whether or not it changes.
Yeah.
Right?
So there's some information to indicate that our type preferences don't change, but we change as people, so our relationship to it alters. So different parts of our personality get exposed over time.
Okay.
Yeah. So sometimes we have a certain type that comes up when we're younger because we're actually exploring a different part of our personality, but the type preference itself doesn't change. Does that make sense? All right, so if you're like, well, I typed as a different type later, it's like, well, that actually might be more you because now you're older and more seasoned and you understand yourself more. Okay. So, and there's some burgeoning evidence to indicate that particularly like introversion and extroversion is pre-wired. So it might be that other parts of our type preferences are pre-wired too, but we don't know at this time. We don't really have instruments to measure it, so we just go based on patterns. Okay. So. What I'd like to do is I'd like to walk through what I think your type preferences are, and then get some feedback from you to see if it resonates with you. And then if it does, I'll do a little bit of a breakdown of what that means, right? Okay. So the first, I'm going to go through what's called dichotomies. They're dichotomies of ways of engagement. And the first dichotomy is the introversion and extroversion dichotomy. So a lot of times people think that extroverts are wild party animals and introverts are all people who are alone reading with a bunch of cats. But really what this is which world captures your attention more, the outside world or the inner world? Which one is the world that tends to juice you up and give you a little bit more energy? During this interview, it seemed to me that you had more extroverted preferences, that it's the outside world that's really fascinating to you. And while you can go in and need some alone time, there really is a preference for what's going on out here. Would that track?
Correct.
Okay, all right. You're like, yes. So one thing I will note as I go through these is actually we're both. Everybody has an extroverted part of themselves and an introverted part, and I'll get to that in just a moment. So while it's a dichotomy, it's not a flip switch, right? It's not like you're all extroversion or all introversion. You're actually a combination of both. It's just which one do you have a little more preference for? So, all right. The second letter is sensory versus intuitive. Again, all of us have both, but we usually have a preference for one or the other. People with sensory preferences tend to be a little bit more grounded and realistic. They're a little bit more interested on what's happening, like in reality, right? What's the practical thing? What's verifiable? What can I personally experience, right? Or what have I experienced? What's something that I know is tangible and real? The other side of the coin is people with an intuitive preference are the ones who are always looking for what's behind the curtain, sort of an overarching meaning. They get a little bit of that information in reality, but they're immediately sort of like thinking about what could this mean? Like the question I said, where would you go if we didn't have to start from there or from here? Is a very sort of intuitive style question. It's like, it's interesting, but it's not particularly grounded. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. I think you might have sensory preferences. I think you have a preference for things that are more sort of happening in reality.
That is interesting. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So
I wonder, do you think that change? Like, I wonder if it changed because I feel like in the past I would be like, oh, that question's so interesting.
Yeah.
Talk about it, but now I'm like, I get no time for that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'll tell you what that means. I'll explain the more intuitive, because you do have an intuitive side, honestly, you truly do. And I think actually, weirdly enough, while that question may have been interesting before, I think you might be actually more tapped into your intuition now than you were when you were younger, and I'll tell you how. Yeah, but there's capacity and interest, and then there's like a way of life. And people with sensing preferences, groundedness is a way of life, and the more intuitive stuff is more fun, right? Like that's more like that's a world they visit. And then when you have intuitive preferences, is the opposite. You're more like this is a way of life, and it's like, oh yeah, I have to go visit the real world, but that's the world that I want to be in. So we have both. We have to, right? We have to have a grounded part of ourselves and a creative, imaginative part of ourselves. But which one is the one that we're going to give more weight to? And I think you give more weight to the grounded world. Does that track?
Right now, yes, it
Okay.
does.
All right. All right.
I don't know if it was typically, if this was typical of me, but I think right now,
Okay.
that is the world that I have to like inhabit.
Got it. Okay. So, and then we can also go through what the meaning and implication of all of this is. And if we get at that point, you're like, that's not really resonating, please let me know at that time too. Okay. The third letter is T or F, thinker or feeler. Obviously, we all have thoughts and feelings, so it's not about capacity again, it's about weight and preference. And while I think that there is definitely a very practical side of you that wants to get things done and make things happen, I think that at the end of the day, you prefer or resonate more with basically the subjective human experience, right? Your feelings, and again, not making it about emotions, but making it about like what's right and wrong, what's the implication of what I'm doing with the morality and ethics, and how is this going to play out with people, and how is it going to impact people, and how is it going to impact me? I think that ends up getting more weight than the more sort of digital thinker side.
Yeah.
Does that resonate?
Yes.
Okay.
Is that more selfish?
Well, I would say there's a self-referencing that comes in there, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily selfish, right? And I can unpack that a little bit more too.
Okay. Okay.
So the final letter is J or P. It stands for judger or perceiver. It doesn't mean judgmental, right? It's really where we prefer our organization and where we prefer our freedom. So judger types like to have a lot of organization in the outside world. If their outer world is organized, they feel more comfortable because when they go in their inner space, it can just kind of float and go wherever it wants to, and they can sort of ruminate. Perceivers prefer freedom in the outside world. They don't want to have to follow schedules. They want to be able to do things last minute if they can get away with it. And when they do that, though, they kind of have to have their ducks in a row. They kind of have to know how they think about things and how they feel about things in order to, at that moment, make decisions that are right for them. And I think you might have perceiver preferences. I think you're a person who organization is something that you've had to come to terms with, but you definitely have a preference for being a little bit more spontaneous.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So that would be ESFP preferences, right?
Okay.
Okay, all right. So that means a whole thing. Like that's like the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole ball of wax. But just to give you an overview of the thing I mentioned before, which is, how do you prefer to take in information? What's your evaluative criteria for making decisions? That 4-letter code of ESFP is, it's a code. It's like a decoder ring for what are technically called cognitive functions. Cognitive functions is that mental wiring, that capacity to sort of take in information in different ways and make decisions in different ways. And all of us, there are 8 in total, and all of us have 2 of them that are our favorites. And of those 2 favorites, there's one that's our favorite. And by favorite, we mean that it's a way of life for you. It's just sort of how you move through the world. And then in order to make sure that you're a complete person and not just relying on one thing, there's another half of it, which is almost like a guiding force for it. It helps navigate through, basically life. And because these are your favorites, there are 2 other functions that are associated with them, almost like they're polar opposites, that will also become influential because they sort of come with the package. The first 2 that are your favorites are a place of certainty for you. You feel the most confident when you're in them. The other 2 are a place of a little less certainty. So you might be skilled in them, but they never quite feel as grounded. They never feel as confident when using them, but you still like them, okay? Does that make sense? So in order to give you a little bit more context, imagine your mind is a 4-passenger vehicle, okay? In the front, you have a driver, and sitting next to the driver, you have a co-pilot. And behind the co-pilot, you have a 10-year-old child, and sitting behind the driver, you have a 3-year-old child. And these are sort of metaphors for these 4 functions inside of your mind.
Okay.
Yeah, stop me if you've heard this.
No,
Are you familiar with this
actually
piece?
not, no.
Okay, all right, so the driver function is, as I mentioned, your favorite mental process. And when I describe it, it's going to be that sort of like, isn't everybody like this? And it's just sort of a way of life. The technical name for your driver is called extroverted sensing, and we've nicknamed it sensation. This is a function that is about experience, all right? It's about experiencing reality. It's about the moment and being present and like enjoying it if possible, right? Sometimes it can be a desire to go have an adrenaline-fueled experience and kind of get your blood pumping. Sometimes it can just be that moment when you're like sitting in the sand with your feet, on the beach and your feet in the sand and like your kids are around you and just like, this is a perfect moment. Why would I ever want to change it, right? I'm just so relaxed. But it's a capacity to basically get the most out of every moment, right? I'm here, I'm alive, I'm now. Why would I want to be anywhere else, right? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah.
Because you have that capacity, because that's a place that you're good at, which by the way, there's a reason why like Mindfulness Magazine exists, is because a whole bunch of people can't be present, right? They're like, when they're in a moment, there's like their brains are someplace else. When people have this as a talent, they end up being, especially when they're in a really enjoyable moment or a moment that has captured them, very aware of their environment, almost merged with it, right? They're just they're here, they're in the space, they're in the flow of life. And so there's a sense of activity that comes along with that, engaging with the environment. A lot of times people who have this as a driver, they handle their lives by getting into action, by getting ahead of things, not having to-do lists. Just immediately as they know that something has to come up, they're just handling it immediately. They try to run ahead of problems by if I'm just busy and active and getting things done, then I never have this like to-do list that's growing and growing and growing. So there's a proactivity that comes along with it. Does that resonate with you? All right. So the beautiful thing about this function is its capacity to be playful. Usually parents who have this as a driver function are playful and sort of performance-oriented and make a fun experience for their kids and very much relate to their kids and just kind of enjoy doing things with them. There's a sense of fun and lightheartedness, and why would we take any of this too seriously? I mean, we're all gonna die someday, so why not suck the marrow out of life, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is really a genius for you. Like, this is something that you do, that you have tapped into, an energy you've tapped into that not everybody can tap into. It's very unique to people of your personality type, and it's really a thing of beauty. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So that presence, that not really thinking too far in the future. I mean, sometimes.
Yeah.
But not counting on it. Not really thinking about the past as baggage, right? You're carrying, but really being here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
All right. So that's what's called a perceiving function. So that's how you take in information. People with this capacity tend to learn by doing, right? That's how they get their best learning. They figure it out while they're engaged.
Yes.
They tend to pick up language as well, actually, because they're really tapped into vocal tonality. When they learn languages, sometimes people don't know they're not native speakers because they pick the accent up really fast too. Does that track?
That totally tracks.
Yeah. And they're really good at reading body language. They're very aware of, not necessarily the read the room thing that we mentioned before, but more like, what's everybody's body language? What are they communicating to me through their presence? Yeah. All right. And they also, people with this love to travel. They love new experiences. In fact, routine is pretty boring, and if they don't get enough new experiences, they kind of start to go crazy. And so people of this type that have this as a preference, they tend to be people of variety. They do a lot of new things because that's what's interesting, right? I've done that before. Why would I want to do that again, right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, because I remember like coming back from China, I was like, I've already seen this.
Right.
It was actually very like disconcerting. Because I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
I thought, like, what?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and so that's food, by the way, for you. Like, it's food for your soul to be able to mix things up, to be able to be playful, to be able to experience new things all the time. It's an important thing that if you deny yourself permission to do because not everybody's like that, a little bit of your energy will leave you. Does that track?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because even like, sort of the mundane, doing the dishes and cleaning, for me, it's like I have to frame it as like, this is an experience that I need to do.
Yes.
And so it becomes fun.
Yeah.
Because I think of it as like,
That's right.
actually, this is good.
Yeah.
Like I'm making something out of this. This is good.
Yeah. This is the function that some of the greatest performers of all time have had because they're so connected to the moment and experience in their body and the environment. And so this is it's very often associated with performance of some kind, like stagecraft or athleticism or just having fun, just performing things out. As opposed to, like teachers who have this function, they tend to be the most fun in elementary school. You know what I mean? And you probably, like if you were an elementary school teacher, like I'd be the fun one, right? Yeah. All right.
Perhaps.
Yeah. So that's your strength. It's your greatest strength. It's what we call the driver, and it's the place of highest certainty. So when you're in any context that requires a response from you, you're going to be pretty confident in that situation. But you also need a way to make decisions, not just learn and perceive, but also determine what's important, right? Make evaluations. And I believe you're using a function that's technically called introverted feeling, and we call it authenticity. So this is about doing what's right to you, right? Assessing what is in alignment with you. You know when something is not in alignment with you because just something feels off about it. You might not even be able to put your finger on it, but just something is not right here. And it's not necessarily emotional, but it is a feeling. It's like something's out of alignment. And so that feeling helps guide decisions. It helps you determine what the right path is for you. It helps you get inside of who you are as a person. You mentioned that as you've aged, you've gotten to know yourself more and more. You've gotten to know that like there might be more territory in there than you previously thought when you were younger, right? There's a lot to being a human, right? And that means the dark parts too, not just the fun stuff, right? So this gets you in touch with the deeper part of yourself. Even though you are good at being playful and present and doing things out here, there's also a serious side, a side that wants to be honest with yourself, to be in alignment with the things that are right for you. And people who have, this is all resonating? Okay. People who have this as a strength tend to be very interested in concepts of right and wrong. There often is a spiritual side or a religious side that goes, what would God want me to do? Or what's the right thing for humanity? Or how do I make sure that I'm showing up as maybe even a model of what it means to live the right life? Is that tracking? Yeah. And so instead of telling people what to do, they usually try to model what to do, right?
Yeah.
Okay. This is also a function that very much gives people space to be who they are, because you want space to be who you are.
Right.
And it's a function that it doesn't necessarily have to be, as I said, highly emotional, but it is in touch with one's emotional side. It's a function that's good at processing emotions, how things are making you feel, but not just getting a trigger, but like going all the way to the other side of like actually processing that emotional experience and determining what it meant for you as a person. Does that track? Yeah. Phrases like, what is most subjective is what is most universal also usually tracks. And so when you said, this feeling part, is it selfish? Well, I would say that what you're doing is you're using yourself and your experiences and how things are making you feel as a point of reference to go, I bet if I feel this way, other people are probably feeling similarly. So when you see somebody having a rough time, you go, ooh, I would hate to be in that situation. And so then there's a motivation to come help that person because you know how it would make you feel. So it's probably making them feel something similar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I do try to, in some ways, I try to wrestle against that.
Yeah.
Because I recognize that just because I feel this way does not mean that they are feeling this way.
Right.
And so but in the past, I was convinced that everyone felt that way.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But now I'm kind of like, that doesn't necessarily, I can't project myself onto other people.
Sure. And I think that comes with some seasoning. I think that is a really important thing to realize over time when you're a person who uses this function to go, not everybody's emotional experiences are the same, but they're probably pretty close, right? Like in a situation that would cause somebody to feel shame, how they're feeling about it is probably different than how I'm feeling, but there's probably like it might be 1 or 2 degrees of difference, right? But man, it would make me feel this way. So maybe I should just even check in.
Yeah.
Right.
But I would also trust what they tell me.
Right. Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
So even if they tell me that they're not ashamed, I would believe them. Like even though I would think that's impossible, I would still think, okay, I believe you. This is what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, because everybody has a right to self-express and self-report, right?
Yeah.
And you would want that for yourself.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is all resonating so far? Okay. So that place of authenticity is not quite as certain as the driver, but it is a place where you feel some confidence, some modesty, and you're going to use it very much in behalf of other people instinctively. Like if a person is truly hurting, there's going to be a part of you that wants to help comfort them. If a person's an underdog, there's a part of you that really wants to help bring them some comfort there too.
Yeah.
Okay. So as I mentioned, these have basically what's polarity opposites of them on the other side. And they're effectively the exact opposite, but you also have a relationship with the exact opposite. So sitting behind the co-pilot is basically like a 10-year-old kid. And it's the opposite of introverted feeling, so that makes it extroverted thinking. And we nickname it effectiveness. Right? It's the ability to get things done. It's the desire to focus on outcomes, make things happen in the outside world, make some progress, right? Gather your resources and your tools, figure out how to make it happen, and then get to that outcome, right? When I said, do you hate to redo work? You're like, yes. And effectiveness, it hates to redo work. It's like, I just want to set it and forget it if at all possible, right? Yeah. So this is a part of who you are, but it's the first place where you get to a little bit of uncertainty. So people who have this as a strength, like let's pretend somebody had it as a driver function, they would be people who are very good at setting schedules. They would be very good at managing time. In fact, they would be very in touch with time. All those things would be very obvious to them. In the same way that your ability to just like, hey, it is what it is, and just be present is obvious to you. For them, time is obvious, resource is obvious, money is obvious, and people are obvious, right? Like how it all fits together to make things happen. You have this inside of you. It's a part of you. In fact, I didn't ask you this, but it probably gives you a little bit of leadership quality, right? There's a part of you that can like kind of command people and move their energies around and have them do things, right? Yeah, we didn't talk about that, but I'm assuming that that's the case.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. But because it's like a kid, you know how kids, they'll get into their thing and they'll make a whole bunch of stuff happen, but at the end of it they go, where's mom? I want mom to look at this to tell me I did a good job, right? And so mom, come look at the thing I made. And if you reject it, they go, I must have done a bad job. But if mom goes, you did an amazing job, they go, I know I did not, right? Head pat. This is the part of you that might need some head pats. Right? And so when people notice this, when they go, hey, you're doing a good job there, you just go, oh, thank you for noticing, right? So this is an energy inside you, but it kind of competes with the other parts of you that want to be more spontaneous and free and just like feel your feelings and know what you want to do because it's right and wrong, not because, why do I have to be judged based on my productivity? Why do I have to do things, right? Can't we just like understand the importance of like being and I didn't mention this, but at the beginning you said beauty is a product. Ooh, your sensation, your driver is like, beauty. That's a thing. Everybody needs to understand how important beauty is, right? Because that's the part of you that's like present with beauty.
Yeah.
This is the part that's like, yeah, but get to work.
Right.
And so there's a little bit of resistance towards this part. And at the same time, it also pops up and goes, should we be getting things done? And you're like, oh, okay, go listen to the podcast, go read the books. How do I get things done, right? Trying to lay the train tracks of getting things done right before the train hits it, right?
Yes.
Does that, yeah. These two, by the way, the sensation driver and the effectiveness 10-year-old, they can get in cahoots with each other. And when that happens, they're like, keep getting things done, keep moving, keep in action. You're not doing enough, go, 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 right? And it's that authenticity part that goes, and also give yourself some time, right? Have some time for yourself.
Yeah.
Is that part of your backstory? It usually is for people of your type, that they've burnt out at some point or overdone it or gotten too busy, and they kind of had to remind themselves, maybe I should just take a minute.
I don't know if burnt out. I mean, I just think just the COVID last 3 years or whatever, that was tough.
Yeah, that's just it's like so fresh in your memory.
Because there's no me time, right? And there's no, like, everything is intense.
Yeah. Well, if you haven't had that experience of burnout, good for you. You avoided a major challenge of people of your type. You were like, nope, I've always known myself, and I've always given myself some space.
Yeah.
Good for you, actually.
Yeah.
Good for you. All right. So the final piece of the puzzle in this tip of the iceberg overview is the 3-year-old that's sitting behind the driver. This is a very important part of who you are, just like any 3-year-old is in a family, right? It's not like, oh, you're only 3, you're not important, right? This is an important part, but it's also precious, and it can be a place of deep uncertainty. So even though you love it and it is important, you're not always sure what to do with it. Almost like a toddler that's entering the terrible 3s, and you're like, do I put it to bed? Do I give it a snack? What am I doing here? Right? Like, there's a little uncertainty in this part. So this is the opposite of the driver. If the driver is technically extroverted sensing, this is introverted intuition. This is your intuitive part. This is the part of you that likes philosophy. It likes implications. It does have a creativity to it. And we call it perspectives. It's about taking multiple perspectives in order to see a situation more clearly. You said when you were younger, you just kind of assumed everybody was like you. And then at one point you went, no, they're not. Everybody has like a different angle on life, don't they? This is the part of you that goes, what is their angle? And jumps into their perspective to kind of ask what's happening for them when they're looking at this scenario. Does that track? Yeah.
I've definitely gotten better at that. That was not a thing that I did in the past.
Yeah. This part of ourselves, I mean, it's just 100% of us, we gain a relationship with it over time. Almost like we're old enough now to parent a toddler or to have a relationship with one. When we're young, it's just, it's like a 16-year-old trying to babysit. It's like, diaper, what, right? Or maybe a 12-year-old back in my day, right? When we were way too young to be babysitting, and we still were, right? But as we get older and more seasoned, we start to build a relationship with it and understand how precious it is to us. We start to really honor it and value it and listen to it at times. Perspectives doesn't just get inside other people's perspectives, though. It also sees implications way down the road. If this keeps going this direction and I run a simulation in my mind, what is most likely to happen at the end of it? So that concept of implication, how did people not see this coming? Obviously social media was going to be used for evil, duh, right? That's very much about this perspectiving process. And so it's also the place where shower thoughts come up, right? Ding, it's the insights you get and you're not even sure how you got it. It's that knowingness that you are connected to a spiritual source, something divine, right? Your authenticity feels approval, but I think it's your perspectives that just has this knowingness, right? And you don't even know how you know. You prayed and God answered you, and you're not even 100% sure how you know that. You just know it. Yeah, this is your perspectives. And so, this is a function that I would encourage you to continue to form a relationship with as you enter midlife, right? As you enter midlife, this is a really important part of you to kind of bring up into your sensation. Sensation is really tapped into the here and now. It's really about what's happening, but there's also like an inkling of knowingness about what's next, an inkling of knowingness about what's the right place for you to be headed, almost like a vision for your own life. Does that track?
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if I don't think about the future because I'm like, you can't predict it, but also, it's like future is crazy. You just really can't predict it.
Right. Yeah. And that's that feeling of uncertainty, right? It's like deeply uncertain. I could run a projection into the future, but how would I know I'm right?
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Because I wouldn't. Exactly. It's almost like if I do project myself and it doesn't happen, then I'll be disappointed.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
And so there's this sense of I'm guarding myself from like the disappointment of failing at my projection.
Yes.
So I'm not even going to project.
Yes. Yeah. So all types have what you just mentioned, kind of that relationship to that part of themselves. There's always something that's like, but then if I do this wrong, it's not going to feel good. It's not going to turn out for me. It's going to just, why would I even do that? And yet, this is an important part of who you are, just like the 3-year-old is in a family. So making peace with that uncertainty, allowing yourself to think about it, maybe not get attached, because there's a difference between using something and attaching to it. When you see a vision for your future, just go, this is one way that it might turn out. And if I do these actions, I can't actually predict that this is going to be the outcome. I have a better shot, right? If I do these actions, I have a better shot of it being the outcome. So I probably should create that plan, or at least some steps. And the more you do that, I think the more you'll actually, weirdly enough, also feel more at peace spiritually too. Like you're creating that, you're living that plan that God has for your life, right? Does that track? And you're heading that direction, and it's through almost like messages and a knowingness that helps you create that. So that's for you, though. Take that as what you will. I'm just talking about the personality type, but you are your own unique person. So have that, do with that as you will. Right. So does that all track for you?
Yeah, I think so. What's interesting to me is when I have taken these tests in the past, when I was in college, I always scored as an ENFP.
Yeah.
Not an ESFP.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating to me. So that little, that's interesting.
Yeah. It is by the way, is very common for ESFPs to type out as ENFPs.
Really?
For a couple different reasons. First, the tests are actually, a lot of times, not always, and tests are getting better all the time, or instruments are getting better all the time. But for a long time, there was a bit of a bias to the questions. So the ones that were weighted towards intuition always sounded cooler. So there was a lot of people who were sort of testing out as intuitive. So I think there was some bias in there. And also some of there's 2 different styles of sensing.
Okay.
One is a little bit more about being associated with the past, a little bit more about routine and routinized, and sort of more of a safety orientation feel. And the other style of sensing is yours. It's present. It's not attached to the past. It's like go with the flow, improvise, maybe even do some scary things, and go, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that, right? And sometimes the tests are more weighted to the other style of sensing. And so there are reasons for it, but the real question is what I just said. Is that tracking? Is that resonating? Okay. All right, great. Do you have any questions for me at this point?
I asked someone earlier, like, how does culture impact these styles, right? Because I'm like a third culture kid. Yeah. And how does being, like, I married my husband who's an introvert, and like introversion does not exist in my culture.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Like that's an American Western thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, just like how does this impact collectivist culture? Anyways, that was just it's a long question.
It's a good question. And I can flay it out a little bit more, after this is complete. But culture has an impact on who we are as people. And our type isn't who we are, it's their preferences. And so we have to make peace with how our culture is encouraging us to use our preferences. So sometimes if we're an introvert in an extremely extroverted culture, we actually will show up more extroverted because that was our training. Yeah. We still have a preference for introversion and vice versa. And so our culture actually definitely influences us. But at the end of the day, this is still our wiring preferences. Yep. All right, so you feel complete? Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
This is brave, it's super brave, and I really appreciate it, Luda.
Thank you so much. I wanted to give you a copy of
sweet.
our
Okay.
book to check out and read more about your personality type. Thank you for being here today. I think you did a fantastic job.
Thanks.
I was talking, I was like, is she going to do good? I think she is. And you nailed it. You nailed being you, which is awesome. It's good. That's all you had to do, right? Be unique to you. All right, everybody give her a great big hand. Thank you so much.
Thank you.